the two biggest issues for voters right now are illegal immigration and inflation. And it was not even, a side note in this freak show of a debate. It was so pathetic.
So I was just in Whitewater, Wisconsin, which is a town of only 15,000 people. There are over 1,000 illegal migrants, mostly from Nicaragua, who have showed up, who have descended upon small town Whitewater, Wisconsin, in central southern Wisconsin. This is happening 1,300 miles from the U.S. border. It's not rare. It's happening in Ohio. It's happening in Wisconsin. It's happening far away from the U.S. border. Didn't have this madness when he was president. It's unjust. It's not fair. One other factor that was really troubling to me, Sean, people in Whitewater, Wisconsin were afraid to even talk about it.
All right, guys, the debate is over. We are going to go through it, dissect it. What went well, what didn't go well, will there be another? I would be remiss, however, if I didn't start the show by acknowledging today is the 23rd remembrance and observance of that unbelievable, horrible day in our country when people did horrible things to us, but we also had thousands of Americans that stood up and remind us why we are the greatest country on earth. And today we honor their sacrifice. We remember the people who perished. And we also do what we were asked to do, which is never forget. And I think as much as this is a weird segue, I think last night was part of that. We were asked to choose the next commander in chief. We were asked what qualities matter. And last night, people had to decide who's going to lead this country, who is going to keep us safe. I will get into it with Steve Cortes and Grace Curley in just a second about whether or not the moderators helped us do that job. I don't think they did. They overlooked a lot of subjects, especially in the areas that today we're reminded are important. So I want to get to that. As I said, Grace Curley up there in Boston. Huge win for the Pats, by the way. They said that we couldn't beat Cleveland. Ha, ha, ha. Anyway, big win for the Pats. Steve Cortes in Chicago continue to do great work. You remember we talked about that documentary that he did. He continues. He was probably still in Chicago for that awesome documentary that he did about trying to get in and pointing out the hypocrisy of the left. Well, he's been doing more great work. We're going to talk about that in a little. Before I do that, I want to tell you about some of the other unexpected things that can happen in life because you never know when your power is going to go off. I've had that experience personally. I had a gas-powered generator at the time. And I think if you've watched the show, you heard my story about running down the street, hoping the gas station was open, hoping that it took credit cards, because if there's ever an electrical grid hit, that probably won't work. Are you going to be ready to fill that generator, to run back and forth every 3 or 4 hours, to run a couple cords into your house to get those important things going? The cool thing is I have a Patriot Power Generator 2000X now. If you go to 4patriots.com/Spicer, you won't have to worry about it because it comes free with a solar panel. That means all you need is sun. And sun doesn't close, sun doesn't take credit cards. So you will be fine. And that's why I have peace of mind. You can bring the Patriot Power Generator into your house. It's portable. It powers the most powerful thing for hours on end. Your refrigerator, tablets, all that kind of stuff. You can move it. So if it's not you that has a problem, but maybe your mom, a family member, a friend, you can pick it up. I can pick it up. Right? I mean, that says a lot. And you can bring it to somebody's house to be that person in need. Trust me when I'm telling you, you will not regret in a time of need, whether it's for 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, having a Patriot Power Generator 2000X in your house. Go to 4patriots.com/Spicer to get it now. Trust me, you want to be the guy that everyone goes, you know who saved me? I'm the guy right now. You need to be the guy or the girl. So go to 4patriots.com/Spicer. All right, I'm excited to bring in the panel here. Grace Curley, welcome back to the show. Steve Cortes, good to see you. I want to hear about the amazing, great work that you continue to do, exposing so much of what's happening in a very useful way, in a very provocative way. And I think that some of the work that you're doing is great because I get asked, I was at last night a Trump debate watch party, and one of the guys in the Q&A before said, what do we do with people who don't get us? And I said, you can't attack them. You have to logically and methodically bring them to water. Let them come to the conclusion. I love your videos because they expose the hypocrisy of the left and they make people go, you know what? That might sound good, what the left likes to call vibes, but so much of their policy doesn't make sense. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let me start with you guys. Let's talk about vibes. What did you think coming out of the debate last night, Grace? What were your thoughts about how he did, about how she did? And we got plenty of time. So believe me when I say we'll talk about the moderators in a second.
Yeah, I thought that, and the assessment I think is pretty dead on, that she did better than expected. I actually didn't expect her to do too poorly. If you take 5 days in a hotel and you kind of hunker down and you memorize some slogans, I don't think it's that high of a bar to reach. I think that Trump got baited more than I would have liked into certain conversations. But I will say this, I find it amazing how, and I think this is a strength of Republicans, conservatives can be so critical of ourselves. We really can be. I mean, I hear all these people saying everyone lives in a bubble. The bubble that I was in last night was conservatives kind of hitting the panic button and saying, this is terrible. He's awful. He's not a perfect debater. He never has been. And you know, but he's a fighter. And I don't mean to sound corny about it, but I think people forget how much is getting thrown at him at once. Like, people keep saying 3-on-1. It's not 3-on-1. This is beyond 3-on-1. This is several different institutions, several different media conglomerates going after this guy, lying about this guy. And while, yeah, would I have done some things differently? I absolutely would have. Do I wish he could have stayed a little bit more focused on certain fronts? Sure, of course I do. But I'll be real with you. The level of frustrated I got from watching it, and I'm not even up on that stage, I think people have to give him a little bit more credit for handling all of that without losing it, because I was losing it sitting at home watching it. So that's what I'll say is, I understand the assessments. I wish Republicans wouldn't be so doom and gloom about things, like, because it's not just, and this is the last thing I'll say, it's not just that Republicans assess it honestly and do hit the panic button, and they get too high or they get too low depending on the day. But it's also, you look at the left and you go, they're not sitting around here giving it an honest critique. They're not saying, hey, she did better than expected. They're saying it was masterful. This was a moment that, like, so it's not like you have these people who are measured and they're giving their balanced approach to it. They're going all in. So I appreciate the assessment of Trump, and I think there's merit to what people are saying. But it's like, all right, let's not go too crazy on it being such a blowout. I don't believe that. And one other thing, sorry, I know, I'm sorry. I'm already, Sean, look at this. I'm already saying one more thing.
I like it.
Now with social media, and Steve can speak to this more than I can, and I really like the way my dad put it today. I was talking to my dad, and he said there's almost like there's the debate, and then there's the autopsy of the debate, thanks to social media. So it's not, what you saw last night, it's not over. It's not black and white like, oh, right, he lost, she won, because today we're getting all of these different stories coming out about the things that he wasn't wrong about, that she wasn't fact checked on, and I think it adds a different layer to it. Steve can talk about that, but just something else to keep in mind.
No, I think Grace, that's such an important point, because look, and all of us are media people, and I think we realize that while there was surely a very big audience, I haven't seen the numbers yet, but there was surely a very big live audience. In general, people don't watch live television much anymore, except for sports, basically. So the clips are more important often than the actual program. And the clips can last for days and days. They certainly last at least into the next day, depending on the news cycle, depending on how interesting and provocative they are. It can last for weeks afterwards. So I think you're exactly correct that we shouldn't, in other words, like whatever score was on the scoreboard at the end of the debate, and I'm not even sure what you would fairly put on there, is not necessarily the score that stays, because it can change in coming days. And also to your point, because I think this is really key, to judge Trump fairly and in context of the incoming flack that he has taken, that is absolutely unprecedented. As a matter of fact, speaking of my documentaries, my most recent one that is out is The Persecution of Trump. And I encourage people to please watch it. And I make the case that Trump is the most persecuted public figure in all of American history. And I think that is true based on the evidence. If you look at all of the propaganda against him, all of the sham legal cases against him, all of it leading to him actually being shot in the head, I believe he's the most persecuted public figure in American history. And if you view him in that context, I think you need to grade him a little bit differently regarding his performance last night, which I think, by the way, was very, very good. Now, could it have been better? Of course. For example, I wish his closing statement, which I think was absolutely excellent and compelling, I wish that had been the opening statement.
Yes, 100%.
I don't know how many people were watching and paying attention by the end. That's my worry, right?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack. We're not going to take fossil fuel. We're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision. But I just ask one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
That's your clip point. I'm hoping that gets clipped. I said that after the debate last night. It was simpatico on that, bro, because I was sitting there saying, this is what you should have opened with.
Yes.
So let me just give you since we're in a sports metaphor, clearly, as Grace was talking, I kept thinking about this. Like, we are Sports Center right now. We're stopping the clips after the game and like, okay, look at his knee. He could have, if he had pivoted right, he could have gotten an extra 5 yards, right? That's what we're doing. And I hope people understand that are watching, right? This is Sports Center now for politics. That we are stopping and watching the tape and saying, hey, I always tell people, listen, and you heard it at the beginning, and I am a huge Patriots fan. I don't like the Jets. I mean, detest them. That being said, I think I'm an objective enough of a fan that I could say, wow, they had a good game. That doesn't mean I'm rooting for them. That doesn't mean that I want them. But if they were, playing another team, I could say, wow, I actually thought their offense was good or their defense came up better. That doesn't mean you're rooting for them. I think you can objectively be a fan and look at another team. And so here's my 2 cents. I thought to your point, Steve, and to your point, Grace, like we are being over analytical. We're holding him to, it's like, it wasn't 3-on-1. And when you said that, Grace, I wrote it down because I thought to myself, you're right. It was 3-on-1 on stage, but behind stage was Kamala Harris's best friend, the head of Disney, the head of ABC News, that was like, here's the question, here's the topic, here's whatever. It was the director with the angle. Somebody else asked me like, hey, look at the angles they're shooting at Trump versus him. I talked about this before. The optics matter. They let her have the little podium. She didn't have the same size podium. They did so many things, and that's not like there were so many things to optically make her look better, right? So it wasn't, and I'm glad you made the point. It wasn't 3-on-1. It was like 3,000-on-1. There were a lot of people behind David Muir and Lindsey Davis that were like, hey, we're going to help you, right? We're going to make sure that you do this. I do think, that being said, there were some missed opportunities, and I just want to be blunt because I want him to do better. I want him to win. And when you love somebody, it's like when my kid comes home and has a bad test, I'm not being critical. I'll say, hey, okay, why did we miss this one? Okay, because I know why you chose A and not B, but if you had slowed down a little, maybe you could have understood. The question was sort of a trick question, right? They were trying to get you to understand, blah, 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 blah. And that was what the goal was. I think when she came out of the gate, first question, and got asked, are you better off 4 years ago? David Muir said, can you answer that question? And she went off about my passion is small business, even though I've never actually worked in the private sector. And I'm going to go off on this meandering word salad. I would have said, if I were Trump right afterwards, David, She didn't answer the question, so let me do it. You aren't better off 4 years ago from 4 years ago. I had a better 4 years. Here are the reasons why that my record is better than hers. She won't answer the question because she knows the answer and da-da-da. And by the way, passion, small business may be a passion of hers. She's never worked for one. She's never signed both sides of a check. I have. I know what it's like. So these fake policies that she's cribbed from Biden's website, I don't have to fake them. I know what works. I know what works in business. I know how to create jobs. And I mean, like, he could have just from the get-go, I think, destroyed her on that alone. Again, there are a lot of great lines. We can talk about them. But I want people to understand, I think we could, there could have been a little bit more. Okay. I want to play you guys a clip. We have a mutual friend in all of us, Tim Murtaugh. He's appeared on the show a bunch. He's now a senior advisor for him. I want you to show how he answered this question, because I really thought to myself, this is how you answer a question from the way that the media frames it. Let's see if we can pull that out.
Trump has been saying on Truth Social just yesterday or a couple days ago that he wants to prosecute people that are acting nefariously in the election, already casting doubt about this election and still refusing to accept the results of the last election. Why?
Well, I mean, first of all, the premise of that question sort of presupposes that certain people are okay with people breaking election law. And I don't really think that's the case. If people break election law, they should be prosecuted. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
They are prosecuted.
Certainly. So why is this such a controversial thing? It's something that we should all agree on.
But talking about extending it to legal, other legal teams, to donors, it suggested the idea of prosecuting political opponents.
If you're going to ask a question about someone prosecuting political opponents and don't mention that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's Department of Justice are currently, at this moment, prosecuting Donald Trump, then it's not an honest and forthright conversation. They are currently, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Department of Justice are currently engaged in a prosecution that could end up with them trying to sentence Donald Trump to jail. The way you ask that question, it's though that's not even happening, but it is happening.
I want to, okay, so what I love about the way that Tim answers both of these questions is he goes after the question itself, and I think too often we take the bait. I love the first one, which is, so let's just be clear. Donald Trump said, I just want to make sure that everyone gets this, and this is what I thought he did masterfully. If you break the law, we'll prosecute you. And she's just like, do you think that sends the wrong message? Wait, the wrong message? What, He was like, so let me get this straight. Then she goes, well, they are being prosecuted, which is not entirely true. But again, he goes back to, okay, so what's the problem then? You object to prosecuting people who break the law? I think that clip exemplifies how we need to start going back at these guys. Like the premise of the question is so nuts sometimes because they want to get them.
You're so dead on, Sean, and I love how she says, like, but what he's implying there, well, that's not what he said. So unless you're all mind readers, everyone's like Karnak the Magnificent when it comes to Trump. They can tell you exactly what he was actually thinking. That's not what he actually said. And the other part about this, and I'm so glad you played that cut, and I just wrote it down because I'm going to steal it and play it in my show today. But this is what I do.
In the Boston area, you will hear it again today.
I come on Sean's show and then I steal everything from mine. But it's so true. It's like the best people at this are Senator Tom Cotton, for example. He does this every single weekend on the weekend shows. He never accepts a false premise. He stops it right there. And then when you do that, when you don't accept the false premise, you're able to pivot into what people actually care about. And it's not that hard to do. Now, I will say this. Trump's not able to do it. I think it takes a certain level of discipline, and it takes a certain level of not taking things personally, like being able to compartmentalize the topic of conversation and the questions and not take them as a personal attack. Now, in the case of Trump, oftentimes it is a personal attack, but that's not his strong suit. He's not able to reject the false premise. And there were so many times last night that I wish he had not taken the bait and, in fact, just completely ignored the question. Because you know what? You noticed that last night with Kamala. She does it all the time. She totally ignores the question. She answers what she wants to answer, and she'll pivot to whatever she wants to. And there were plenty of times when it came to his real estate business or when it came to January 6th that I just wish he would have said And his advisors do this all the time. That's not what people care about, David. That's not what people care about. And I'm going to tell you what people care about. And you're right to play that cut, because the false premise that these people set up, it's so dishonest. And it just takes a little bit of crafting your answers to be able to avoid that trap.
Right. And listen, I think that was masterful of Tim Murtaugh, somebody I think we all know, somebody I used to work with in the 2020 campaign. That was masterful of him to just reject and deconstruct the false premise of that question. You know who else does that really effectively is J.D. Vance. And I think it's one of the reasons that I think he is so effective as vice president. I think one of the reasons the media goes after him so hard is because he is so skillful at deconstructing their false premises of their questions. And they can't stand that about him. I think it's one of the reasons they attacked him, so vociferously, particularly right after he was nominated. I think he's largely weathered that storm, and I think he's proving his worth so far to this campaign. But for example, I'll give you a specific example of him doing that last night when he was talking about this situation in Springfield, Ohio, a town of only 60,000 people that is overrun with 20,000 immigrants, illegal migrants from Haiti. 20,000 in a town of only 60,000 people. Now, whether or not things are happening to pets and animals seems to be debatable at this point. According to some of the citizens, it is happening. Now, are they making things up? We don't know. But what JD did very skillfully.
Hold on, Steve. But just I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to inject. I saw online people showing the actual complaints with the police department, right?
No,
so
I think there's some evidence. Absolutely.
Right, and I want to just distinguish this, because the point that you're making is important, where they may investigate and say, okay, but the complaints have been made. They are lodged with the with the police department. Correct. Those complaints are on the web for us to see. Okay,
right.
No, I apologize, because I wanted to make sure people understood that.
No, those complaints are not manufactured, right? I mean, we know that those exist. So, but what JD did when he was asked about this, it was Caitlin Collins from CNN, and she tried to say, well, the city manager said it's not happening, right? And so as if we had to accept that premise. And JD said, wait a second. The city manager, number one, could be wrong. Number two, the city manager only said, we don't have information that it's happening. Right. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. Okay. And JD then also pivoted, and he said, the bigger point here is, okay, let's say the animals are fine. This is still a massive problem, what's going on in Springfield, Ohio. It's wrong that we are doing that to the citizens of his constituents in Ohio.
Wait. This is the one, I'm sorry, and this is the one thing that got me pissed off last night. I've dealt with city government, several times over my, 20, 30 years, whatever, on different issues, right? Let's just stop and deconstruct what I said and what you guys said. There are complaints that we can see online that people have filed with the police department in Ohio, okay? The police department. And what's the answer of CNN and ABC? We called the town manager. Oh, okay. Do you think the town manager gets every police report that comes? I mean, are you kidding me? What town do you live in? Unless that it's the Dukes of Hazzard, where Boss Hogg is also the manager. I mean, and he's not, by the way, because I did watch. But my point is that that's the dumbest. You're gaslighting the American people. Right. It's like saying there's no he has no report of a building code violation. He's the town manager, and it's like that. So it is amazing the extent to which they went out of their way to fact check a guy using false information. Right. But these reports exist. They're not, to your point, Steve. It's a different subject whether or not, when they're investigated, whether it was entirely true or not, but they do exist. Right. And this is where they gaslight us. Yeah.
And JD didn't fall for it, thankfully. And he also, I agree totally with Grace. I think Senator Cotton's amazing at it, maybe the best in politics at that deconstruction of false premises. But JD's pretty darn good too. And I think getting better all the time. And I think will be valuable now into this closing stretch of the campaign, particularly if there are no more debates.
There's one with him, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, but his debate is something I'm really looking forward to. That's going to be October 1st. And I think, when you put his intellect up against Tim Walz, I mean, it is going to look like a giant beating on a dwarf. I mean, I really believe that, because JD's just at an entirely different level of intellect, persuasion, eloquence, and that is going to be a heck of a debate to watch. I hope it gets a big audience.
And can I just add in a few things I just thought of, because we just mentioned Senator Tom Cotton, J.D. Vance, and you're right. I mean, they're so masterful at the way they're able to kind of reject the false premise and reconstruct the conversation. But with those two guys, and this is no shade to them, this is not me putting them down, you do lose something else. You know, you do lose a little bit of that spontaneity, and you do lose a little bit of, and this is what I'll say, because this would be my criticism of Senator Tom Cotton. And I love him, by the way. I play his cuts all the time. Sometimes with Tom Cotton, you don't get the feeling that he's communicating on behalf of all of these people behind him. And I will say that about Donald Trump. I can sit here and I can say, I wish he had more of Tom Cotton, and I wish he had more of JD Vance, and I wish he was able to spin this and spin that. But there's something about Trump that none of those guys have, and that's why he's Trump. I know it sounds like, what is she talking about? She's talking nonsense. I get it. You lose something else when you have all that perfection and you have all that almost robotic ability to control the conversation. There's a reason he can't do that, and the reason is because he's angry, and the reason is because he keeps getting screwed over. And one more thing I'll say about, we were talking about the scoreboard, and we were talking about how what we saw last night, and Steve, you put it in such a great way. What we saw, the score last night will not probably be the score today or tomorrow or next week. That's such an important thing to remember, because when it comes to this conversation about the cats, that's a great example where it's something Trump does a lot, where he'll say something and everybody, including conservatives, loses their mind and says, why did he bring up the cats? He looks crazy. I do it. I did it last night. I'm like, oh God, the cats and the dogs. What is he doing? And then you start to realize oh, now Caitlin Collins, whether she likes it or not, is talking about Springfield, Ohio. Now, all of a sudden, J.D. Vance has a platform to talk about Springfield, Ohio, and all of these forgotten people who these media head honchos do not care about. And there is a little bit, and I don't want to say 4D chess and all that, but there's a method to that madness of saying, you want to talk about the memes? Well, let's talk about the memes. And then people might do a little digging and say, why are they talking about cats? And all of a sudden they come across this stuff in the autopsy of the debate that otherwise they never would have looked at. I hope that made sense.
I think it totally makes sense. I think it totally does. You know, the analogy I would use is like Trump often does this. It's as if he throws a ball to the other side of the yard where there is nobody, right? Instead of throwing it to somebody to catch. And you say, why did he throw it over there? And before you know it, we're all over there. Okay, I mean, it's almost like he's a bit of political Nostradamus. I mean, for real, like he can see around the corner. He's incredibly good at that by intuition. You're exactly right, too. And I think the point you're making also about Trump's authenticity. One thing I got last night, and again, I think there were problems with his performance. I think if he had opened with his closing remarks, it would have changed the whole debate. But I think he did really well on the whole. And what I think he did the best at, and it just naturally flows from him because of who he is as a person and the contrast versus Kamala, is he is so authentic. And sometimes that authenticity can drive you a little bit crazy because you're right. He's not calculating enough, right? He doesn't speak in a lawyerly or scripted way, the way some other masterful politicians do. But the contrast versus Kamala Harris, who I think is probably the least authentic politician on the national scene in America. And I don't think that's just my political bias showing. If I'm trying to be objective, if you were to say, who is the least authentic person in American politics? I mean, I would legitimately make the case, even aside from my ideological differences with her, which are vast, I would make the case that it is Kamala Harris and that Donald Trump is perhaps the most authentic person in national politics. And so if this election is in part at least decided by vibes, and I'm kind of sick of that term, but if it is decided by vibes, Trump can win on vibes because he can win on authenticity, particularly versus somebody who is as scripted and manufactured as Kamala.
And also this agent of change. People are still, and he brings that for all of the aforementioned reasons. I want to talk about issues that were covered and not covered, okay? And so we're going to delve into that in a second. But I do want to think one of the issues that wasn't covered, interestingly enough, is sort of the government controlling a lot of our retirement systems, what's happening. And you know as well as I do right now, if you go to retire, you pretty much get a 401k or an IRA. The government controls every aspect of that. How much money you can put in, when you can take it out, how much you can take out, you're locked in everything. But there is an alternative that gives you guaranteed predictable growth in retirement income with no luck and no skills. Your principal and growth are locked in. It's tax-free retirement. You'll know exactly what your tax rate will be, 0, which protects you from the coming tax tsunami that we all know is headed our way. You get peace of mind, and you'll know the minimum guaranteed value of retirement savings on the day you plan to tap into them. You can get a free report explaining everything I'm talking about in these alternatives to the government-run retirement systems, the IRAs, the 401ks, with all the details on the bank on yourself strategy. Bank on Yourself is totally different than anything you've ever heard of before. It guarantees predictability, and you can control your own financial plan. Just go to bankonyourself.com/Spicer, bankonyourself.com/Spicer, and it will open up a world of alternatives that you're not being told exist right now. bankonyourself.com/Spicer. All right, Steve, you've been talking a lot about immigration out in Wisconsin. You mentioned what's going on in Springfield. You're seeing this firsthand in Wisconsin. What issue? Well, let's just start with that. Do you think immigration got its due last night as an issue?
Absolutely not. No. And that was very much by design, I'm sure, right? Because ABC and David Muir, they knew that that is a very vulnerable topic for Kamala Harris. You know, it is for any Democrat, but particularly her, because she was the border czar, even though they want to pretend she wasn't. And so she has particular vulnerability on that issue. It is either the number one or number two issue in every single poll. And I'm doing extensive polling of the battleground states. Sometimes inflation and economy is number one. Most of the time, though, it's immigration. And those are always the top two. And by the way, it's not even close for number three. I mean, so those are far and away the two biggest concerns, the two eyes.
And they're linked.
Yeah, of course they are. Of course they are. Inflation and immigration. And so, you know, an example of that. So I was just in Whitewater, Wisconsin, which is a town of only 15,000 people. There are over 1,000 illegal migrants, mostly from Nicaragua, who have showed up, who have descended upon small town Whitewater, Wisconsin, in central southern Wisconsin. They can't deal with it. They can't deal with it in financially.
How did they get there? How does 1,000, are they bust there? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, bust and flown into, and you know, when these illegal migrants cross into the United States, they basically choose where they want to go, and then at taxpayer dime, they're sent there. And Whitewater, it has a college there. It has a UW Whitewater, University of Wisconsin, and so because of that, it's kind of a lefty town, and so they got, you know, very, very welcomed, at least at first, by town leadership, not by the citizens of the town. And once that starts, you know, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because their cousin's there or their friend from their hometown in Nicaragua is there, and they all start showing up, and it has become an incredible burden for this town. In the schools, for example, 20% of the children in public schools in Whitewater, Wisconsin, don't speak English. Now, if you're the greatest teacher in the world, how can you possibly teach a classroom effectively when 1 out of every 5 students doesn't even speak English? There's significant crime problems in town. And to your point about inflation and immigration being interlinked, they are showing up largely with vouchers that U.S. taxpayers are paying for their rent. It's not a big town. There's not a lot of housing supply. So guess what? Rents have skyrocketed for the American college kids, for the longtime citizen residents of Whitewater. This is happening 1,300 miles from the U.S. border. And so my hope is, I'm going to get this documentary out before the election. My hope is by exposing what's going on there, and showing that it's not rare. It's happening in Ohio. It's happening in Wisconsin. It's happening far away from the U.S. border in small towns across the country, that is going to convince enough persuadable people or lower propensity voters that they've got to get out and that they have to vote for Donald Trump because he will secure the border again. We didn't have this madness when he was president. It's unjust. It's not fair. It's not right what is happening there. And I can tell you from interviewing people and seeing it on the ground. One other factor that was really troubling to me, Sean, people in Whitewater, Wisconsin were afraid to even talk about it. A lot of people told me off camera, they would say, I can't stand what's happening here. They would tell me all the problems that they've had. They tell me they've gotten in car accidents with unlicensed, uninsured migrants driving around their town recklessly. But then they would also say, Sean, but I'm afraid to talk about it. I won't go on camera. I'm afraid of the social ostracism. I'm afraid of recriminations in the workplace. So there's an intimidation culture, unfortunately, that people like Kamala Harris and her allies have created in this country, and that has to stop. We've got to end that silencing of regular, sensible Americans who want to speak about the problems that have been unjustly inflicted upon them, and hopefully that's part of what this doc will do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that. Grace, what issue? I mean, I felt like today's 9/11. I felt like national security got short shrift. Terrorism didn't get discussed. Energy, China, the debt. I mean, I was like, to Steve's issue, I mean, they checked a couple boxes. I mean, we got plenty of time to talk about race, climate change. What were the other?
A lot of abortion, obviously.
A lot of abortion.
Yeah.
I'm looking down here.
January 6th was a big one.
January 6th, yep. 1021 race came up. Obamacare at 1027. Climate change.
Obamacare. Like, what about inflation? What about the two biggest issues for voters right now are illegal immigration and inflation. And it was not even, you know, a side note in this freak show of a debate. It was so pathetic. This is what the American people actually care about. And no, I thought, and again, that goes back to, you can't expect the moderators to put forward what the American people care about.
All right, Steve, before I want to get to the moderators, because I do want to talk about this, but is there another issue? You mentioned immigration, and I'm with you on this, because I think it's amazing. I also think, as a side note, CNN K-File did that story the other day about like culture. I got to put that one down, because I felt like she does this whole thing about paying, and this ties in, illegal, she wants to pay for transgender surgeries for people who enter the country illegally, because that's, hey, I'm glad I'm working every day to help pay for that.
Right.
And yet they didn't touch it.
Right.
And I don't want to talk for suburban women, because I'm kind of not one. I could identify as one, actually, for the purposes of the show. But I feel like I hear that as an issue all the time from women, young moms, whatever, who say, I worry for my daughter, I worry about for my future daughter.
Right.
And yet nothing on that. And there was a lot of issues that I thought, wow, they got completely blown over.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And by the way, to that point, so I interviewed a mom yesterday in Whitewater. We're going to have to blur her face because she doesn't want to be identified, which again, I think is tragic. But regardless, at least she came on camera with her identity protected and said that she fears for her own safety because of the dangerous migrants in her town, and she fears for her children. I mean, so this is real. I mean, this is tangible and sad. And
Steve, when you say safety, are they worried that their face or name gets out and that the migrant community would come after them? Are they worried about their neighbors?
Both. Yes, both. So more the social ostracism from their neighbors,
Right.
but then also worried about actual physical, violent recriminations from the migrants. Yeah, that's the reality there. And I mean, this is crazy in America. We shouldn't have to live this way in the United States, and we wouldn't if we had control over our border. And then the idea that on top of it, we should pay for sex change operations for these illegal migrants who come in. And by the way, kudos to CNN. I don't often praise my former employer, CNN, but you know what? Good for Aaron Burnett, who was the one who did that reporting, and the K-File to bring that out. And they were even astounded. And by the way, I will give you
the look. I played this yesterday. The look on Aaron Burnett's face, because Kaczynski has this in writing and audio. So it's like, you can't duck. You literally said it too.
Yeah. And by the way, I'll even give additional praise to CNN. In the Trump-Biden, in the Trump-Biden debate, I really believe that Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who I don't think are fair journalists generally, but on that debate night, I thought they were really fair. I really believe that they were. And I think it's one of the reasons that Biden imploded, is he wasn't getting a helping hand from the media. And what a contrast, though, compared to last night, because then we saw from David Muir and ABC, the exact opposite. The media just reverting right back to their usual form and acting as a PR protection agency for the Democrat candidate.
Sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to interrupt, but they weren't fair on CNN because they're fair. They were fair because they wanted to get Joe Biden out. And I have no doubt that if they were hosting Kamala versus Trump, they would have done pretty much the exact same thing. The moderators... But what the moderators really did, and a lot of people pointed this out last night, you screwed Trump, and it was an ambush, but it was such a failure on the part of the American people. Like we were looking for answers, and to your point, Sean, about her woke agenda, she's now claiming, and Bernie Sanders has said it too, like, oh, she's just pumping the brakes right now. And then once she gets in the White House, she's going to ramp up all this crazy leftist ideology. This would have been a great time to say, do you feel that way? Do you still support transgender surgeries for people in detention centers? Yes or no? And there was no follow up. There was no holding her to task on any of these things. And how about the fact that she said,
there were two other things that I thought were fascinating. One is she said, I'm going to explain all my flip-flops when it came to the issue of and then she didn't, and they didn't follow up. And when Trump pointedly asked her, and this is the key question on abortion, okay, well, what's your limit? How late will you allow abortion? She was like, I word salad, I eat this. And they literally like, okay, next subject. They gave her the out. It was an assist. And I just want to say this one quick thing, because I'm going to forget it if I don't. Your point about CNN, Grace, is critical to understand. They did their job, and their job was to help push East Biden out.
Right.
And I don't like to do this because I don't try to be I told you so guy, but I've been saying this for a while. ABC had a mission last night. This is like the border wall. Everyone says they're not doing their job at the border wall. Yes, they are. They know exactly what they're doing. They're letting people in because they want them to vote. This is not like when people say they're not, doing their job. You misunderstand what they think their job is. And last night, ABC did its job. ABC got the message. I've been saying this for weeks. They knew they are the last known wall. Like, who knows if we'll have another debate or not. And their colleagues and their friends and the left said, David Muir, Lindsey Davis, it's up to you guys.
Yeah.
Take them out. It's like the old Karate Kid. Yes, sensei, sweep the knee, baby, because this was it. They had to do their job. And everybody says, oh, they were biased and they didn't. No, they got the message. Message received. Take Trump out. Make it 3-on-1 on stage. Do whatever you have to do. Help her, hurt him.
Yeah, and one other thing too that I couldn't help but notice is she loves this new way forward. That's part of her policy proposals now, is the new way forward, the new way forward. So when it comes to holding her to account for anything she's done as a senator, as a vice president, then it's all about, hey, new way forward. That's in the past. MoveOn.org. We're looking ahead. When it comes to Trump, it's like, let's rehash January 6th for the 15th time tonight. There's no new way forward for Donald Trump. And what ended up happening was it started to feel like he was the incumbent and she was this change candidate. And that's what really ticked me off, because there were so many things that, and I thought about this the other day. I said, imagine going in. I wish I had tried this before, but imagine being in like a private company and going to the CEO and they're doing your performance review, and they go, you've kind of run this company into the ground and our numbers are down and everything. And you say, listen, it's all about the future. It's all about the new way forward. I would like a promotion and I would like my own parking spot and I would like a corner office. Thank you very much. I don't want to talk about the past. That's not how real life works. No other job in this country would you get promoted for that.
Yeah. Dude, I love that. That's a great, can you be like, can we just stop talking about the past, please?
Yeah.
I want to talk about the future. Like, I have a feeling like I may try that. Walk in one day and be like, guys, I know you're talking about last year's sales numbers, but I'm focused on the future.
Right.
So I'd like more money and I'd like to just keep I want to turn the page.
Yes. No, it's a great comparison, because she wants to enjoy the benefits of incumbency, right? Of being the sitting vice president of the United States, but without the burden of owning the record of being the vice president of the United States.
What's her line? I want to be unburdened by that which burdened me.
When she says that, Sean, if I can make a point here, because a lot of us on the right correctly mock her, right? Because she says it so often and it just sounds so flowery and a ridiculous platitude. But I think there's actually some sinister meaning there. I really do. Because I think she actually means that when she says it. And when you say that we are unburdened by our past, what you're really saying is, philosophically, we reject what America has been. We reject the greatness that America has achieved. So I view that line as a far more sinister threat, really, to the United States, of we're going in this entirely new direction that is unconnected to the success that America has enjoyed for centuries. And I believe in her heart, that's probably where she is, because she is a Marxist, even though she's hiding her Marxism presently with a lot of help from the corporate media. And the corporate media also, by the way, didn't hold her to account for some just ludicrous lies last night, a lot of them. But the worst one from my perspective, because it's a topic that I've spent years trying to debunk, is the Charlottesville hoax. And she repeated it again. Biden used it in his debate. She used it now in her debate. No fact checking from the media, not live, not later, not afterward. This issue could not be more crystal clear. Even Snopes, which is a very lefty fact checking site, even Snopes now admits it was 7 years too late, but even they admit that it is a complete lie, that Trump never praised bigots. As a matter of fact, the complete opposite. He explicitly condemned them at Charlottesville. And yet she brought it up again last night.
She knew exactly what she was doing.
Giant audience. She knew she wouldn't get fact checked. And now millions of more people probably believe that lie, that Trump praised bigots in Charlottesville, when the opposite is true.
To your point, Steve, that's the thing. She does it. She knows if you can get away with something, you do it, right? I mean, that's all the time you talk to someone. Why did you do it? Well, because I could get away with it. I want to cover two more things, kind of, because there was something fascinating that happened at the end of the debate that, again, I love these kind of inside baseball things. Two things happened that were unique. One, her camp that was claiming that they killed it immediately called for another debate. Now, generally speaking, the person who calls for the debate is the person who's behind the curve and they just want more debates. I thought it was interesting that Brian Fallon and her team immediately said yes, and Trump wavered. Number two, Trump went to the spin room. He hasn't done that since 2016. And I usually tell a candidate, let your debate performance stand on your own unless you have something to clean up. Both of you, tell me, let's just answer this question first, because this is the easy one. Will there be a second debate, yes or no?
Well, I don't think so. I really don't. I hope so. I think it'd be good for the country, but I don't think so.
I agree.
I don't think so either. And I heard Trump today on Fox, and he said, they were asking about Martha McCallum and Brett Baer, and he said, I don't want to do a debate with them. And I don't blame him, because when you think about how in the bag ABC was and David Muir and Lindsey Davis for Kamala Harris, Martha McCallum and Brett Baer, it's not the equivalent. The equivalent would be to have a far right, like a Jesse Waters do the debate, and that's not going to happen. But that would be the only way.
Yeah, and for people, there's two things that I want people to understand. Number one, she'd never agree to that, right? We all know that. Kamala Harris won't ever even agree to one with Fox. Even if David Muir got a contract with Fox, she'd say no.
Right.
And that's not going to happen. But secondly, I know from my conversations with Fox over the year, and I ran the debates in 2016, they will not let a non-news person do a debate. It's like church and state to Fox. So right. I know what he wants. Number one, Fox won't give it to him. And number two, she won't give it to him. And so that's, okay. I think we're generally in agreement, though, that I don't see how another one happens. I will say this. I think she's going to try to taunt him. And that's where I would be careful, because Trump, I think at some point says, all right, I'll go anywhere, do anything. And I think that could be interesting. All right. I don't know that you guys saw this coming as the last thing that I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to, because I think there's something fascinating about this. I was a little taken back by the Taylor Swift endorsement at the end. And I'll tell you why. I don't really care. First of all, if you're dumb enough to care who Taylor Swift wants you to vote for, then God bless. I mean, then you got bigger problems. But I thought the timing was stupid. And here's why. If this happened, today's Wednesday, if this happened Thursday or Friday, she would have gotten attention and it would have been the story in the morning. Taylor Swift and a cat endorsed Kamala Harris. She stepped on herself by endorsing him as everyone was spinning about the debate. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of coverage of it. And I also don't think it's unexpected. I mean, she's a lefty. So I don't think it matters. And I also think it was stupid timing, Grace.
Yeah, I didn't really get the timing. I think the point of the timing, if I had to try to figure out what their strategy was to make it seem like, because she started by saying, I just watched the debate, to make it seem like this was such a slam dunk for Kamala Harris that now I feel
this was so authentic and not
right.
Scripted.
That I feel the need to tell you all that this is who I'm voting for. I don't know what it does. I'm always confused by celebrity endorsements, whether or not they move the needle. I tend to think they don't. Obviously, she's a different kind of celebrity. She's in a different stratosphere. So that's something to consider. But I will say this, and this is just something that I was reflecting on. Brittany Mahomes has made comments in the past that she's a supporter of conservative values, or, I didn't even really look into the story. I know she liked a tweet about J.D. Vance or something like that. And then there was all this pushback that was the reason Taylor Swift wasn't sitting with Brittany Mahomes, was because she's mad she's a Trump supporter. And I remember thinking, that's so lame. That's so disappointing that, these two women who are friends. And then it turns out they're at the U.S. Open. They're hugging. It's wonderful. And I said, oh, that's so nice that they have different political views and they can still be friends. And then Taylor Swift comes out with this endorsement, and my instinct is to be like, ugh. But that's the country we live in. And she wrote in her statement, which I did find interesting, I did my research. This is who I'm voting for. I encourage you to do your research, and then you chose who you're voting for. So I find myself in some moments being very hypocritical.
By the way, I thought that I got asked about that last night. I think that was totally her business people came to her and said, you're going to piss off half the country with this. At least give it a caveat that, you should make up your own mind so that we don't piss away billions of dollars. That's how I looked at that.
It probably was like a conservatives buy sneakers too moment, but I did think to myself, it's funny how when Brittany Mahomes said something, I thought, well, good for her, for her politics. And then when Taylor does it, I'm like, so just.
Oh, Taylor does it. It's awesome. Brittany Mahomes does it. Is she going to be forgiven? Steve, I got 20 seconds.
That's life.
Yeah. Steve, in 20 seconds, how much is this affecting your vote?
Yeah, listen, I don't think the endorsement matters at all. I will say this, though. If she starts actively campaigning, if she starts singing, if she starts doing concerts in the swing states, that absolutely could matter. So let's
I don't
not
think she will.
completely discount
I
it.
do. She can get people to vote. Yeah, I don't want to dismiss it. Just, I think Steve's right. If she actively starts getting people to engage, I think that could have enough of an effect. Remember, it's not a ton. Could have enough. All right, guys, thanks for an unbelievable breakdown of the debate. Tomorrow, Friday, Robbie Staubach's going to be here. Amazing panel tomorrow to continue to break down everything that's happening as we enter the final 50 days. Hit that notification button. You never know when we're going live. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.